I'm gonna focus today on a kind of question around carbon positivity. I think, given the nature of the exhibition, and I'm honored to be in Stockholm, the home of one of my heroes. And I pulled this up yesterday, putting this together, just kind of comparing. Basically yesterday, or she posted the one on the right a couple days ago, to see the contrast over the year of her life. She's clearly older. That's the difference in this image. There's no snow. Very disappointed by the weather in Stockholm right now. But I think most of all, her facial expression to me exhibits a resignation and a fatigue that I find very problematic and concerning. I mean, frankly, I'm trying not to get emotional about it, but you know, I think her facial expression on the right is why I'm here. I think when you see someone like the Davos crowd coming and reconciling with this truth, it really, I think, is getting at the heart of who we are as architects or people in the construction industry, this construction scum, as I would call it, that you know, this challenge that we have as society, but you know, specifically I'll talk about architecture and construction, of the question of half, as I would call it, which is never mind carbon neutral, carbon positivity. The first step is, how do we just cut what we're doing right now in half, and how do we do that today, right? It's such a fundamental, massive question when you think about what half is. First is, like, what are we talking about? Half of what, right? So we think about global emissions on an annual basis. 40% of emissions are attributed to the built environment. Of that, roughly 30% is the operations of a building, the heating, cooling, lighting of that building. And the other 11% is the embodied carbon of the project. The actual, what's required to make a project, make a chair. I think the fundamental thing that I've come to learn over the last year is this question of embodied has been a complete blind spot for everybody in our industry until very recently. Certainly through my education, there were two words that were never even spoken around a lecture. And what this means every year is that on a monthly basis, right now, as we're constructing the equivalent of New York City, and not the city of Manhattan, but the city of New York and all 5 boroughs, and the total square meters of that city are being built into the world every month. And that means that every year we're going to kick that much square meters up into the operational budget as well, which only makes that thing even bigger. Fast forward a little bit, a lot of this footage is going to find its place in Africa, in India, in developing settings, and primarily where I've been working over the last 5 years and where I'll be showing you. So it's pretty important that we get this figured out right now, certainly in places like Europe, that's in the middle of this, but very important that we figure this out in the parts of the world that are going to build a lot. And this challenge is massive when you think about it. When you begin to just get your head around it, how do we have the operational emissions of our current building stock? I will talk about this room right now. This room, you know, doesn't have a shred of natural light coming in it. The entire thing is fed by a mechanical system forcing air into it. If we said to the exhibition, cut your utility bill tomorrow, what would they do? Massive problem. And then on the other half is everything you build from today, how do you have half the footprint of the last project you just did? Where would you start? This chair, how could you say half the carbon of that chair that we're all sitting on? So, first question is, well, how do we count? What do we do? How do we use, what are the metrics that we're going to start with to ask that question of half? And I think this is probably where fundamentally the language around sustainability has been caught. And things like LEED, I'll use LEED as the North American kind of example, is that, you know, we've developed a system of box ticking, of points, of like, great, I'm like 90% sustainable, or platinum, or what have you. And most of our attention has been on the left side of this document. Recently, it's encouraging to see materials and resources being reflected on a LEED checklist. 10 years ago, anything embodied wasn't even part of the calculus. This has led to a mode of practice. This is from my governing body earlier, or this time last year, that really set me down this path of what the hell are we doing? This email, increased energy efficiency through 13 distinct layers. this is how we're going to move forward to meet the 2030 target of half. I started thinking about, okay, what are you talking about? 7 3/8 inch EPS foam core, 3 inches of rigid mineral foam. What is that? Lightweight cladding. There's that little green layer on the outside. This is what my professional body is telling me is the future of practice, right? Self-adhered liquid applied air control layers. Surely this is not the material we should be using. In the 90s, in my childhood, born 1978, I recall vividly big movements forcing McDonald's to get rid of these materials from our food chain. We moved to paper. We, as architects, celebrate this material. We quite literally conceive our buildings out of it. That's fucked. So this blue foam, this is like one element. When you dig into what is blue foam doing, is it sustainability? Look at all the things that blue foam does compared to rock wool and phenolic foam. These are the materials that we are using to build our environment. This is what it's doing to the environment. So we're thinking about energy efficiency, high U value. We haven't paid any attention to all the other things around this, and I'll speak specifically around ozone depletion. That when the life cycle assessment of foam right now is thought about, it's looked at over a 100-year cycle. Extruded polyethylene foam uses CFCs in its making, which have a 5-year lifespan, which do massive deterioration to the ozone. Again, materials that we lobbied out of the food chain, out of our refrigerators, they found a home in our insulation. So we begin to understand what a building is. It's not just operational energy use, it's all of this pie. And we need to come to this realization incredibly quickly. So I'm trying to grapple, we need a better language. Sustainability has failed us, frankly. Call it hedonistic or whatever it is. It's not a language we can continue to use in my mind. If I asked you, is your marriage sustainable? And you said yes, you're probably not in a good situation. We have that relationship with the planet. I would argue we need a different language and to take from slow food, good, clean, fair. Good, back to that kind of dignity question. Everybody deserves design. Design is beautiful and just, and it's essential to delivering our human rights, services, and the built environment, the spaces we live in. Clean, all projects need to be climate positive. It's an imperative. It's not something we can opt for. Our projects strive not only for efficient operation, but the design of the entire supply chain to be sustainable, resilient, and regenerative, and fair. Looking at construction holistically through this entire thing, how are we looking at the handprint, the labor, the people that we are engaging in the making of the world? So, a bit about MASS. MASS stands for Model of Architecture Serving Society. We're a group of 130 architects, engineers, filmmakers, graphic designers, working across, I'll show you in a second, a couple geographies. Our first project was the Bataro Hospital just over 10 years ago. This is the project with Partners in Health. Out of that, we started in Rwanda. We had our headquarters in Boston, where our founders were going to school at the time. And over the last decade, we've expanded quite a bit, going from 7 to 130 people, and working, as you can see, in a lot of parts of the world, in a lot of developing contexts, and now into the United States. Our work has turned some heads. I think making the Times as an architect is pretty cool. This is our project in Haiti, where we worked with a group dealing with the cholera outbreak after the earthquake. This is the project in Alabama I just mentioned. We've tried to get outside of just the feedback mechanisms of design and into other journals, and getting published in the Business Review and Journals of Medicine to take how can design begin to talk to other disciplines. We've worked with a kind of host of other NGOs, engineering company, governments. So we just started working with the Norquin Foundation, based here in Stockholm. And our method to design is based around this wheel, this mission wheel. The first question is, every project has a mission. What is your mission? Why are you putting a building in the world? Why are you building a library? Is it to build a library and generate a downtown area? No, it's about to educate people and engage the public. The method, or how do you do that? What are the methods you're going to use through design to achieve that? Impact, I think this is a word that is pretty trendy right now, and I think we're pretty serious about what that impact means, and we want to measure it. Like, ultimately, how can you prove your design has efficacy? And figuring out what those metrics are at the beginning of a project to measure against, and not after the fact. And lastly, the systemic change. How can this hospital, this library, change the way that hospital libraries are conceived of or demanded in the future? So I'm going to kind of show a few projects that start to talk about this question of half and move this conversation forward, and hopefully we can open it up to some questions. So the first is just the operational question. And this is what Kigali looks like. Rapidly urbanizing urban center, fastest growing city in Africa, most densely populated country in continental Africa. And a kind of architecture that you can see here, if I took out the title, it's like generic city developing context world would look like that, right? On the left is pretty much most of the building stock built after 1980. And on the right is a document from 1974 out of the AA. And I continue to look at these and just think about, we have forgotten what it means to practice. We have forgotten how to build. We knew this at one point. What happened? Well, my basic theory on this is that there were two buildings built in the 50s that are pretty iconic. The one on the left, downtown, Gordon Bunshaft, the one on the right in Sao Paulo by Niemeyer. One of them considers the environment and one does not. And over time, one has won out. And this was taken earlier this week. The building on the left is going up in droves, and the building on the right are coming down. And this is the direction our world is headed. Yes, as if to say, we have forgotten everything we've known, and we're rapidly moving forward towards a future that's completely unlivable. So I would argue we make a return to passive systems, maybe put some skylights in this building. We started, again, in Butaro, this hospital, where there was no power. There was very little even by way of water, and this was a great opportunity. And these constraints were like, oh wow, first principles, let's think about natural ventilation and lighting in healthcare. We worked with two big thinkers, Paul Farmer, the founder of Partners in Health, and Dr. Agnes Benoit, who was the Minister of Health at that time. And we literally sat down with them for a year to design a hospital, hand in hand with the doctors that would ultimately run it. When we started out, we were looking around for precedents, and not far away, this project that had recently been completed in 2005 in South Africa had a TB outbreak that was, people were coming to the hospital and getting sicker. And I think we think about what's happening right now in the world, that you're going to seek help with your healthcare, and you're actually more likely to get infected by going to that place. It was happening in this room. This is the waiting room. And as you understand, airborne infection diseases, probably not a good place to be because there's no ventilation in the space. If you look back in history, Nightingale knew this. She intuitively said, people in these tents in the Crimean War, they're getting sicker as I care for them. We need to rectify this. She came up with the Nightingale Ward, which served as a kind of model for healthcare for about 40 years. I had the pleasure of visiting this project last spring. Similar, thinking about passive ventilation, access to light and air in a space. Sad to see this is not even functioning as a healthcare facility anymore. And what's happened over the last century is this. We moved from Nightingale wards around to ultimately the room my son was born in looked much like this, a box, not unlike the building we're in right now, which is alienating. It has no access to the outdoor environment. If you work as a doctor, they have the worst working environments of any profession I can imagine. They literally can work a shift without seeing the outdoors. This is the hospital that I spent some time in over Christmas, which, as you can see, is basically a Frankenstein of all these typologies put together, which you get lost in. They're very difficult places to understand. And this is the state of a lot of healthcare infrastructure around the world. So we said, okay, let's not do that. We don't have electricity. Let's limit the floor plate, make sure that we don't need lighting in the event of a brownout. We don't have forced air. Let's use convection and kind of passive ventilation to make sure that the room is getting its air changes. We put all the medical gases and power outlets into one wall as opposed to two. We kind of inverted the Nightingale. So in the event that you need to upgrade things, it's pretty easy to renovate the space and retrofit it. And the beds lastly face out. they face out to the landscape as opposed to facing in. So as a patient, you have view to the landscape. All the circulation is exterior as opposed to inboard. And finally, it's a part of the world you should be looking out. Beautiful. Recovery times, apparently at this hospital, are far better than the one neighboring. On the back of that, the ministry said, great job, guys. We have 31 more. Okay, well, let's help you develop kind of the DNA for these other hospitals and unpack the ones that exist. How can we reconfigure them and make sure that any addition you do in the future is done intelligently? Basic instructions for the procurement department. How do you site buildings? How do you make sure that you're orienting correctly for wind, for sun? How do you look at things through basic thermodynamics, the heat coming off your body to help buoyancy in a room, so you don't need ventilation, or you don't need the fans in the event of, again, outages. You're going to get those air changes just through understanding basic thermodynamics. The floor plans are these heavily annotated, documents, so that anybody can read them, and not just to say build this, but understand why this is, so that if another designer comes along, they can take it and modify it around the parameters, the kind of minimums and maximums that we established. They asked us then to test drive. Okay, good. We want to see a couple of these. So this is the Munini District Hospital. It's in a very rural part of the country, due to be completed this year. And they said, and let's do another one, but let's do it in Kigali. So this is Nyarugenge. This is the rendering, and this is yesterday. So it's almost complete. We then asked to go to Liberia. Totally different environment, not at elevation, hot, humid, rainy. To do the retention building, working with Trend Solar, similar thing. How does this building breathe by itself? How do we get buoyancy in a room? So we adopted solar chimneys as the main strategy for airflow. You can see these kind of knuckled courtyard buildings here, and the stairwells kind of double as that duct, the kind of large ductwork for the project. And ultimately then the chimneys become the totemic items of it, like the reading of its performance becomes its architecture. I'll move to the embodied part. I think that the passive stuff seems obvious when you look in history. We just need to start doing it again. We've been cribbing our notes, and have been for a while, about how are we doing on this project. And see, we've got a couple not great ones, but overall we're doing okay against the global average. 2 years ago, this is the University Global Health Equity, we're at like 9/10. Some decisions were forced into our hands that we should take back material-wise, but slightly better. This is CTC in Haiti, looking at that, 2/3, okay, not bad. But what does half look like? And this is the project that I've been working on for the last 3 years, the Rwandan Institute for Conservation Agriculture. It's half. I think this is what half looks like. This is what architecture could look like. Back to Bitaro, the questions of what our material choices are that lead to these. This project is kind of famous for its volcanic stone, that in the region, what do we build out of? Well, this stuff is coming out of the ground and the farmers throw it to the side of their field as a nuisance. It's free, it's readily available. This stuff's great, it's stone, right? And we took the opportunity to invest in labor with material that was completely free. And over time, I've really used this in our projects in that part of the country. And a simple decision has led to a 30-person cooperative that Hakiza is one of the people in it. They're now doing like 5-star resorts out of the material and have a whole livelihood based around this one type of masonry. Anne-Marie, one of the masons that worked on these projects, in interviewing her, had this profound statement around the value of human dignity in the built environment, and what her work was part of it. And I see the parallel here with I live in a part of London near William Morris's house, where Anne-Marie's statement harkens back to this from 150 years ago, which is around how we make things have to have a human element. We need to be thinking about this with the embodied part of not just the carbon that's in it, but the people that are making it. And I think we need to pair these things together. The carbon footprint and the human handprint need to be clearly understood together if we're ever going to really tackle this question of half. I'll show you 2 projects that talk to this. The first is a school in Lima, Congo, and there's a little movie here. the volume up a little bit. So we were asked by the African Wildlife Foundation to help them build a school in this part of Congo that had an endangered species next to it, where they brokered a deal with the community. We'll build you a school, we'll teach you how to farm, stop hunting this endangered species. This is what the school looked like when we started. Our first thing we did, we spent 3 weeks in the community, meeting the people there, understanding what they need, what materials available, what trades exist, where things come from. We looked at, what are they building out of? And we took a bunch of these back to the lab and performed compressive strength tests on them to understand, okay, can we use this stuff? So this is one of the local bricks. A lot of the weaving that they're using, this kind of rattan, which we've seen everywhere. To get to Alima is extraordinarily difficult. From Kinshasa, which is really the center of the entire country's economy, as you can see, it takes up to a month to send things on barge to this little town called Mpono. And from there, it would travel about, as you can see, 55 kilometers along a path as narrow as your shoulders on the back of a dirt bike to get to the site. So that instantly really limits your material palette of what you can bring in to build with, to what can fit on the back of a motorcycle. We use that kind of comparative table of like, what are you going to build out of this? What's it cost? How many people does it hire? To kind of build up an understanding of what we should make the building out of. And our hand was really forced to us that most of it has to come nearby. Most of the project is sourced within 10 kilometers of the site, and we imported things like nails and hammers and saws. The roof tile is a kind of, I think from material innovation, we took a lot of wood samples back and we found this specific hardwood had a lot of similar properties with cedar, so that it would work really well as a shingle. We brought in people to teach them how to froe a cedar shingle. Kind of obviously a well-known tradition, and certainly in parts of North America. The rattan used this as a screen device for a lot of the doors and windows. As you can see here, the whole project kind of opens up to the large playground. And we were really, again, this question of impact. What impact is this project having economically? We were, not a lot of money to build this project. You can see it's about $350,000 to build a school. And of that, how many people were hired? Great. We hired pretty much everybody in this community. And understand that the unemployment rate in this part of Congo is probably like 98%. So we gave people jobs and skills that they can take elsewhere. Where was it spent? In a country historically known for pillaging its territory, where most of the money funnels to Kinshasa. As you can see, most of it didn't. Most of it really just found itself very locally to this project, which is great. Again, very little by way of development in this part of Congo. And from a carbon footprint, it's almost embarrassing how good it is. 28 times less than a global average. This is what's possible when you source locally and find materials around you that have low footprints. It's just a question of searching and asking. The last project I'll show is this School of Agriculture. So 3 years ago, we were asked by the Howard Buffett Foundation to work with them to develop a whole ground-up school of conservation agriculture. They see agriculture in this part of the world as the pathway to peace, and more of a conservation agriculture, not as a replication of Western industrial agriculture, but as a way to actually have ecology and farming together and through the notions of One Health. So this is an overview of the campus. On the left, there's first-year farms where 21 students work together in their first year to get the sense of what it means to be a smallholder. And as they move in the upper years, they learn different specialties in farming. There's a dairy here, there's a fruit and vegetable enterprise here, there's a row forage pivot irrigation system on this side of the campus. The question we kind of asked is, how do we harvest the architecture from the campus? How do we take this agricultural sensibility? So the project is built almost entirely out of the earth from the site. This is the upper year dorm in the foreground, and that first year farm and their barn in the back there. And this is looking at the enterprises, which are, there's a series of kind of shed-roofed clerestory modules that go across, very kind of industrial, agricultural based. This is what it looks like. This is about a week ago. And we really, again, tried to push materials that were low carbon. I'm a Canadian. Using wood was intuitive. This part of the world was very innovative. Using things like local, fired ceramics. I got a very project in Denmark I love in Ribe. Cribbed the notes on that one and applied it in Rwanda. The inside is, as you can see, kind of naturally lit. I hate that the lights are on in this photo, but we also took the opportunity to take the entire furniture scope, say we'll make that too. We'll do it in Rwanda. And in this photo, instead of using drywall, we used earth-based plaster. Again, every place that we could probably drive down the embodied carbon, we took advantage of. When it comes to quantifying this, this is a Sweden-based system. EPDs, if you're not familiar, are called environmental product declarations. Is to say, this chair has a carbon footprint of X, and therefore if I specify this chair and I have 100 of them, I have this, and I use the EPD that the manufacturer gives me for that chair. Well, that's great if you're working in countries that have green. There's some products that have that, even not that many, but our projects are largely in these gray zones. There's no EPDs, so how do you begin to quantify? And that we began to say, okay, well, we're going to do it ourselves. We're going to figure out the kind of system of doing this and the math. So this is us taking soil samples, taking it to the lab, ramming it, figuring out what's the right soil mix on site, what's available, what do we need to add to it. For rammed earth, you can see we did a whole series of tests of both cores and for compressed earth blocks here. Taking to the lab, perfect, that's the right quarry, that's the right mix, we're achieving the strength we need. We worked with Reliba, the local brick maker here, to figure out the EPD for them. And I asked my team, okay, go all the way back to where it starts, go to the quarries, trace the whole thing out, and see every step along the way how they're expending energy. One thing, this image in the middle is their biofuel source. They basically have a monopoly on all the coffee husk coming out of the country that they use to fire, which is a better option, obviously, than firing with wood or other fuels. And here you can see one of the pallets that had just come out of the kiln. This move to wood, as I've alluded to, this is a part of the world that sees steel as progress. I think as a kind of stand-in for so much of the world, concrete and steel is development. And we see this move towards wood, or trying to promote wood as a construction material in this part of the world, is also having ecological, positive impacts. Like, for every tree you cut, plant 2 more. Think about this as a restorative act, a regenerative act. So we found the one plantation in the country that the Germans had planted 30 years ago. And again, what's there? What can we use? What dimensions are they typically cutting? They didn't have a kiln. We front-ended some money so they could get a kiln to supply the project. We tested it. It's not the best stuff. It might not pass grade in other countries, but we're going to work with it. We're going to design to what's available. And we kind of did the math in-house and pulled all the kind of standards from multiple sources, took a norm, took a conservative estimate, and did this to ultimately arrive at what the footprint is. And this is what it looks like. It's not foreign. This is just earth blocks, a ring beam, and some wood frame. So the total project, 96% of materials are sourced in country, which is a great sales pitch to any government. Of that, the heavy items, all the soils, were sourced within a mile of the site, so the campus is kind of in the middle there. So basically the sand and gravel and soils pulled from the site. Zoom out 10 miles. Again, most of the heavy stuff within the district. Zoom out to 100 miles. Most of the building materials, most of the weight, again, all within the country. We had to go regionally for more of the specialty items like the fasteners, the pipe, the cable. A lot of them came out of Nairobi. And then finally, the specialty items came globally, like the solar. The whole thing is powered with a solar array. A lot of that's coming from China, indirectly back from Congo, and the Middle East is where we're getting some of the larger items. So for the bulk, we're figuring out where things are coming from. On the labor side of things, 98% of the project labor is within 100 miles of the project. And that's all labor. That's not just the construction labor. This is the district that it's in, Bugesera. And we were told by our contractor, we've like literally hired every able-bodied person we can. We're tapped out. So the economic impact of this is like really finding itself immediately next to the site. This is what the architecture looks like. So it's round earth walls in areas, earth blocks. As you can see, here's some of the furniture. This is the student housing. We took this opportunity. It's a furniture fair, so I figured I'd end with the furniture. We kind of asked the design team, okay, we've got roughly $2 million. Get it in as many pockets as possible, and use materials that have low embodied carbon. That was the mandate. Just figure that out. So this is basically all the sources, all the co-ops, where things were coming from. And this is, trying to pair these diptychs here of the tile on the left that's locally fired by this very small, the godfather of pottery in Rwanda on the right there, overseeing his prodigy making the tile. The weaving, part of the country that has a really rich weaving tradition to make things like the lights in a lot of these places. The carpentry, literally bought all the wood in the country to make the furniture, for better or for worse here. All mostly made in various cooperatives around Kigali. Metalworking again, it's kind of there's a Gichinjiru in Kigali where you find all these metal workers, and we worked with them to do little, custom handles and simple furniture. This is for the faculty offices. And then finally, these weaving cooperatives where we married some of the local metal manufacturing and then took the frames back to these cooperatives to fill them out that ultimately became the surrounds and these couchbacks. So the question that probably in the back of your head is, great, you can do that in a place like Rwanda, but how could you possibly do it in Sweden? And I think I'll leave it. I'll leave that open. Thank you.
How are you perceived or how are you received rather in Rwanda? Here comes the white man.
Well, our office is 60-40. I think 40 expats, 60 local. So we're definitely not a bunch of white men.
No.
I lived in Rwanda for 5 years, and my main aim going there was to train a group of people that could run that office. And when I showed up, we were 7, and now we're 110 in Kigali of architects, all engineering disciplines.
110 people in
Kigali. Well, I think we're the largest AEC firm in East Africa.
Sorry,
architectural engineering company.
Oh, and once again?
AEC. Yeah.
Meaning?
Full suite of services company. I don't know.
Okay.
We're the largest design firm in East Africa, to my knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can imagine that a lot of people here in the audience thinks that this, I want to do that. I want to go and help.
Yeah.
But I presume that there are certain risks involved. One doesn't know the local society. I remember one instance when I was moderating a thing in Finland, and there were 3 Finnish architects who'd done a wonderful, according to me, project in one of the African countries. Mm-hmm. It was a communal building for women. And I was sitting next to a South African architect, and she said, this will ruin the society there. Because the women will be in this communal building, and the men will just, they will become total, they're hopeless, the men there. Mm-hmm. so the Finnish architects thought they did something terrific to society, but actually she thought that it ruined society, the structure there.
Yeah. There's a few ways to answer that question. this is also the other question of the nonprofit, is this the kind of colonial question? And I think the answer to it is really, for instance, in Congo, we spend the time to understand the place. We're not just going to fly in and design something and leave. Like Andrew and his wife lived in the community for 2 years to build that school, and became very intimately aware of the context that we're building in. We hired 2 Congolese architects to work with us, and we're very sensitive about any environment is new. And there's 2 ways to look at it. We shouldn't practice in other places and only focus where we are. In fact, all the main lessons I've learned as an architect were because I went and worked in a place like Rwanda, where I had to basically unlearn everything I thought I knew about architecture. And if we come with humility and curiosity to any context, then we can be responsible designers, no matter where. I think if you're a Finnish and you're trying to go to northern Finland and practice, the same questions would arise. So I think that's basically it.
Questions from the audience? I think we've got time for 1 or 2. Not so much time left. Just raise your hand and we'll come rushing with the microphone. Has any one of you worked in Africa? That's the usual story, I suppose.
We're not that provocative, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm interested in the question you got on the screen there. You did some works in the United States as well.
Yeah.
And talking about the half situation, how did you manage in a context that are more like the Swedish context?
Yeah. Well, so kind of expand on my last answer to answer this one. So for me, the epiphany of practicing in Rwanda came pretty early on. And it was I drew a window, as innocuous as a window. I'm a Canadian trained architect, drew a rectangle, said I want a window that dimension. And our builder came back, he's like, well, what do you want me to make it out of? Like, what kind of steel, what kind of glass, how big? Where do you want me to come from? How much money do you have for this? I can get it from Tanzania, or I can get it from Kenya, or this size of truck, or this size of truck. And it was every question I was never thought of asking. And I consider myself a very curious person, but I totally just assumed that he would figure it out. Because, in a Western context of practice, you would go to a catalog, and in my own house, I'd go to my supplier and say, great, I want that window, done. Next one, that door, done. And that was it, end of story, didn't think about it anymore. And that for me is the question of provenance.
Yeah.
That
should provenance be explained possibly?
Yeah. So you have this word in Swedish. I understand provenance.
Well, auction houses use it, but not everybody is on.
We care about the provenance of our wine inherently. Increasingly, we're concerned about the provenance of our food. Thankfully.
Where it comes from.
It's the all-encompassing. It's a word that means the true making of a thing, right? Like the provenance of, the free-range chicken I ate from this farmer in this part of the country is now on the menu, but it's completely absent in our ability to specify, largely. So the window that I specified, Lowen, that's a manufacturer near my hometown, a friend of mine went and worked for them. So I called him after. I was like, John, I'm really interested in where did the windows in my cottage actually come from? So I built this cottage for my in-laws. It's in the woods in Ontario, north of Toronto. I spec'd a window from Manitoba, which is like spec'ing a window from, Latvia if you're in Stockholm. And I was like, okay, and they're Douglas fir. Where'd that come from? He's like, well, probably British Columbia or Oregon is where we get our fur. Okay, interesting. Where's the glass come from? Well, your size? Actually, we get that from Collingwood, Ontario, which is kind of near your cottage. I was like, that's crazy. So this glass is going across the country to then be fit into a frame and to be basically put back exactly where it came from. And then the wood came from another part of the country. And these are, relatively speaking, very sustainable windows. And it just made you think, okay, had I gone for the cheap PVC option, where did that come from? No one would even, I mean, back to my criticism of foam, like, you know, once you get into the world of plastics, it gets very difficult right away to actually trace it down. If you actually think about where that oil was extracted, where it was refined again, where it was, like, every time you ask that question of any material, like this chair, this pink rug, like whatever we're sitting on, you know, that level of provocation and curiosity is where we really need to spend our attention. What chefs were doing 10 years ago, we need to be doing now.
Uh-huh. And
Mark.
sorry, yeah, sure.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I work with Architects Without Borders in Sweden.
Interesting.
And, we recently started a collaboration with Engineers Without Borders in Kenya. And they seem to have, what I understand, they seem to have problems in finding architects to collaborate with.
Great. I'll give you my card.
And then I saw on your website that you were also that you were supporting or running a school, design school in Rwanda.
Yeah. We started a school called the African Design Center.
Okay, so then I thought maybe that's where you should find the architects to work in Kenya.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of good architects in Nairobi. I could happily introduce you to. We're working in Kenya too. We've had the good fortune of working with Engineers Without Borders UK. Half our engineering department has come through them, where we've taken an engineer for a year or two and paired them with a Rwandese engineer and had them work together to, you know, knowledge transfer, which goes two ways, absolutely. We'd be happy to point you in the right direction or work with you.
Interesting. Regarding what you were saying about the windows, it seems to be a question of logistics.
Partially.
Yeah? And I'm thinking that shouldn't the government be able to do something about those things?
Yeah.
What can the government do to help?
Okay, I mean, we had a conversation earlier a little bit about this, that we feel powerless or we don't have, this is above us. And like, architecture is a political act. It's as political as it's possibly putting a building into the world. It's like, it's a political move, right? And all of the questions of logistics and provenance, it's not just logistics, it's about labor. Like, let's not beat around the bush of like, oh, that's a really affordable window. Well, you're probably sourcing it from a part of the world that's got a far different, cost per hour, right? Like, these are what's happening. And I wonder what happened for people old enough in the room. Whatever happened to critical regionalism? This movement, right around the time when I was born, what happened, right? Like, we've lost the plot where we cared about where something came from, or we had a relationship to the material or the making of something, to a point where we do not understand our supply chain. It is completely global. It is completely opaque. Again, the luxury of working in a place like Rwanda that didn't have a global supply chain when we showed up, we had to figure everything out, and that was an enormous advantage, which then I hope we're going to see in other parts of the world. My only comment would be active, like wherever you can specify, that is the power. Engage government, engage the industry. Like this, we need to be really shrinking in where things are coming from. At all, like the entire life cycle of it. I think we have a solar array on the project, and everybody, even my previous speaker talking to the benefits of solar power, the entire array has a 16-year life cycle that you'll have to run for 16 years to make up for the amount of energy that's required to make it. After which, it'll then be, it'll be renewable. It has a 20-year warranty. So, you really need to be thinking about, it's not just about green energy, but it's actually about the life cycle of it. That solar array, a lot of it comes from parts of the world where that mining is suspect. Its manufacture is in parts of the world where its labor practices are suspect. So is it responsible to be specifying things where along that supply chain, things like slavery and poor labor conditions and child labor are occurring.
Okay, and
Right.
that is something you mean that the government could actually
And
insist
anybody,
on?
government, designers,
Yeah.
industry, like we're seeing a concern around supply chain in fashion, certainly seeing it in food. We need to see it in construction.
A lot of lessons to be learned from Africa, it seems.
Absolutely. Yeah. For me, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one quick question if you have time.
Hi, I'm an interior architect actually from Finland, so it's totally different but the same. And we do hotels and stuff like that. And for me, questioning is how do you specify things so precisely that when it goes to bid, the contractors can, when you do all the research and you want to have it locally, and
Yeah.
the contractor goes and source it out from China to Finland, for example.
Good question.
That is the question of our time. Yeah, I mean how do you do it? That's the question, right? I got to spend a week in Finland last spring visiting, basically Aalto's works, and can you imagine him writing a spec today? Like, what would he say? This door handle has to come from that forge in Isfala. Could you write that spec today? And if you can't, that's a problem. Like, we need to, honestly, we need to come back to a mode of practice 100 years ago. That simple. We need more buildings that look like Stockholm City Hall. Or,
The Palmio Sanatorium, for example.
yeah, well, that's got a high embodied carbon. I'm thinking more of the Seinäjoki,
The church.
that's what architecture needs to be. Like, Aurica for us is Seinäjoki. It's like total design. Do we have the time on every project to do that? Maybe not, but we probably need to figure out how to make that happen. And we need to, it's not about agency or power, it's about will. And, frankly, I think it's irresponsible to continue to practice, personally, the way I had been 5 years ago. I can't practice like that anymore. Like, I'd rather quit and find something else to do. Or go farm, I don't know. But, yeah, like, it's what we're currently doing. You could see Greta's facial expression.
Better
Says it all.
not to build.
That's the easiest way to stop right now. Just stop building. Slow down. Figure out what we're doing. Pump the brakes.
Pump the brakes. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Alvarez, Doran, for this. Thank you, and thank you for listening.